Okay, what we're going to be doing is installing excuse me, the ECA 5000 and the 5000 IND, which has an indicator. We can see here we have our ECA control, we have our manual, and of course our spare parts, or the parts we'll be using to connect the machine. So we can probably start, again, pull out our manual, check to see if there's anything we need in the way of tools. All of the safety equipment and the safety parts we need for when we're working with catalyst, gloves and other safety devices. And again, when we have our base unit, we have many choices about our mounting. We can mount it forward, we can mount it on the side, we can mount it on the other side, we can mount it in a different order. So we need to determine how we're going to mount the alarm control box. For us today, we're just going to simply mount it in a very simple position like this, where we have our legible to the front, and we can then mount and make our connections up to our power head and to our catalyst manifold. So start by mounting the control box. We provide all of the parts for mounting the control box: washers, nuts, bolts, brackets. Tighten these down using a couple of 9/16ths. You can see, I'm just going to mount the Okay, so once we get the control box mounted securely, we have our power cord and supply. We can organize those sitting down here out of our way. Well, we can then go to mounting our catalyst manifold. We have to mount our filters and items to the catalyst manifold. So we will mount the catalyst filter for the dump valve and the catalyst filter for our catalyst overpressure valve. So we'll simply walk over. This is where I'll probably need some gloves. When we're dealing with catalyst, we want to make sure we don't get catalyst on our hands, and or when we do, we want to make sure we wash them off quickly. So we'll come over. In this case, we're going to remove our tube for the catalyst overpressure valve. Set that aside temporarily. Now we can install our new So now we have our filter for the overpressure valve, so that this will then connect from our overpressure valve to the alarm, to the proper position on the valve, and then we will connect from the valve back up to our catalyst jug. So we'll now just simply remove the overpressure or the ball valve fitting hose. Again, if there's going to be any dripping, we can simply take a rag to catch any drops of catalyst. And then we're going to mount our new valve with the filter. Okay, so we have our two filters installed onto the catalyst manifold, and we can look to connect those both up to our appropriate ports of the ECA catalyst. Provided we have some extra tubing that comes with the unit, so we can organize these to make our connections. Again, we have our dump valve or relief valve, and that's going to connect up to our recirculation. So we have basically our ball valve recirculation to the recirculation position inlet on our cat alarm, the ECA. We also have the ability to make a connection between our jug and the recirculation, so when the recirculation material comes up, it's going to come out and go back up into our jug. So we can take our recirculation outlet, our inlet, our outlet is going to go back up to the jug, install it into the port. We have our connection here. We can do the same thing for our overpressure. Our overpressure valve or relief valve will connect up to the overpressure, and then we will connect from our overpressure back up to the jug. Okay, so we basically have our main connections for the catalyst manifold to our ECA, and then from the ECA back up to our jug for the returns. So that when we have an overpressure situation, that will then go through the ECA and indicate, as well as if we open the ball valve or leave the ball valve open, that will indicate on the corresponding part of the ECA. We also need to connect up our main flow supply. So if we looked at our hose, we're going to come from the catalyst pump here on our supply to the manifold. That's going to go to the ECA. Then from the ECA, we're going to go from the ECA to the manifold. And then from the manifold, we already have our outlet hose to the gun. So we simply need to remove the hose or the catalyst pump to, again, just making sure we catch any drips. This will come across and go to inlet of the ECA. Okay, so now we'll supply from our catalyst manifold, or from our catalyst pump up to the ECA. We'll have flow. When the pump is pumping, it will supply the ECA. We'll go from the ECA back over to the manifold. So let's connect this to the manifold and over to the jug. So we'll come through here. Again, we want to have the ECA on the outlet side of the catalyst pump and then flow to our catalyst manifold. So we can that hose again up to the. Making sure we tighten our fittings so we don't get any leaking in the future. Okay, so you can see here what we have is our catalyst pump on the other side of the unit. It's going to supply up to the ECA, indicate our flow. That flows down over to the catalyst manifold. The manifold then again dispenses that back out to our gun, up to the gun for spray. Okay, so we have our main connections to the ECA and the ECA to the jug and our supply. The next thing to do is to make the connections so we can connect our air supply and our air supply up to or out to our alarm. Okay, so when we're going to go ahead and make our connections to our air supply and to the catalyst alarm, audible alarm, we have our audible alarm, we have our flow control to the audible alarm that adjusts the sound, the loudness, the audible sound alarm, how loud it is. We also have our connections to our inlet, and also need to make the connections to our air on the connections to the inlet. So we have two options to make this connection to the air supply. We either do that by making a connection from the gun, so we can take our gun signal and we can supply the valve, and that valve will then supply the ECA, or we can take a signal from our power head and we supply a simple elbow that will make this connection. You can see here we already have that elbow installed since we're using the pneumatic stroke counter on the front side of the machine here on the other side. We already have an elbow installed. So what we'll do in this case is simply tee off of this elbow signal and then use that to supply our signal. That will be the easiest and quickest for us, is just to simply tee this elbow. If we didn't have that elbow installed, we can then simply just take the plug out and install this elbow. That will give us a signal. Otherwise, we can then, like I said, use the gun signal. And when we go inside of the control box, we will have a switch. We'll show you as we get further into the setup that we will determine whether we're going to use the power head or the gun signal, and we'll set the dip switch, and then we'll also have to set a sensitivity setting for whether it's an internal or external mixed gun. And then there's one additional setting if we're using the power head for the time delay, but we'll go through that in a minute when we get to setting up this inside of the control box. For now, we're just going to simply make some connections for our air supply. We'll need a simple connection for our determine the right direction of flow so that we get our airflow going into the supply. We're going to take our constant air supply. We can simply use any one of the constant air supplies. In this case, we'll use the air supply for the power head, the blue line for the power head, and we can tee that air supply by using a connection here, and we'll just T that connection to, so we have a simple poly T that will come from our manifold. We'll connect our power head back up to that T. Now we have a supply from the manifold down to the elbow to the power head, and we'll then connect a supply from that T to our supply to the ECA. So now we have, when the air pressure is turned on through the system, we power up or air supply the manifold, we supply the air down to the power head, shift block, and now to the ECA, so we have a constant air supply whenever the main air is turned on. To connect up the audible alarm, we have supplied a big roll of tube that will then be able to mount this anywhere around the facility, either close to the spray booth or far away from the spray booth or onto the column. We'll simply mount ours here at a short section right close to the manifold or right near the boom. And so we can take a short piece of that and we can connect to our air signal. This is our outlet for the audible alarm. We're going to then supply our flow control, again noting the direction of flow, and we can supply that. So now we have our flow control when the audible alarm is active, and we can connect that up. So now again, if this was a long tube, we could mount this in many different positions, either on a wall, close to the operator, or on the column, close to the operator. This is pneumatic, so there's no real safety requirements other than the air to the, and we'll just mount it, I think, here using this additional, and this gives us a simple way for our demonstration purposes on how we can make this work. So we have our audible alarm. It's going to be quite loud here, so we may want to turn that down significantly. So now what we'll do is we'll simply connect up our other connection to the inlet or our signal from the power head. So we just need another short chunk of tube and another T, and we can connect up to our. So if we take this signal back here, and let's use the green instead. Take our signal here. So now we have our T fitting installed. So now when the power head sends a signal, not only will we activate the stroke counter, the pneumatic stroke counter on the front side here, we'll also then be activating the ECA. We have our supply to the ECA. And then we're going to come off from our signal here. So now we have all of our connections, and we can make this look, in a few minutes we'll make these, sorting everything up and clean everything up so it looks nice and organized, but for now we just want to make sure we have all the proper connections and everything is working properly. So what we have, again, now that we have all of our connections and we've determined that we're going to use our signal from the power head and not from the gun signal, we can double check our settings inside of the control box to make sure that we have everything set up, or that it is set up the way we want it to be. And so we can simply open the control box. Of course, you can see we don't have any power connected. We want to make sure the power is off when we make any adjustments inside of the control box. When we look inside,
Okay, when we're setting our three settings inside of the ECA control box, we'll again first set up or determine whether we're using the power head or the gun signal to activate the ECA. That will then tell us how we need to set up the unit inside of the control box. So we can see when we look at the inside, we have the settings for the gun or power head. This is the dip switch. We would put it in the down position for the power head, in the up position for the gun signal. We would then also set, if we have it in the up position for the gun signal, we have our seconds per cycle. The seconds per cycle gives us the ability to set the time it takes for the pump to move either into the one complete cycle, either all the way down and back up or all the way up and then back down. This covers our range of settings. We have, as a general rule, 10 cycles per minute or 40 cycles per minute, which gets you somewhere around 2.5 seconds or 6 seconds on our settings here. So again, we would just adjust our seconds per cycle to the appropriate time it takes for the pump to go down and then back up again. For internal or external mix sensitivity settings, we would come down and look at their sensitivity, and then we would just set our arrow here to the appropriate setting. On internal mix, it would be internal mixes 4, 6, 4, 5, 6. And then on the external mix units, we would set this for 0 to 1. And then again, that's slightly adjustable depending on how we have our, if we're getting pulses or erratic signals on our counter. Just again, make sure this closes up. Okay, so now we're going to connect up our main air supply and turn on our air. We'll walk around and plug in the ECA to the power. So we'll just put 110 power to the alarm. And we can see we have our indicator. We had a quick brief light of all the lights. Each one of these lower lights here in the left-hand corner correspond to the indicator at the top in the similar row. So we can then go ahead and we can start to do some simulation. Okay, so what we have again is our indicators. We have the power is on. We have our flow switches at the bottom indicating flow of any of the three inputs, either the main flow, the recirculation, or our overpressure. And then we also have our alarms. If we see an indicator here, we will hear the alarm sound. So let's go ahead and we're going to simulate by using the priming button. We can now see that we have flow through the ECA. This simply indicates to us that we have a material flowing from the catalyst pump through the ECA, out the ECA to our catalyst manifold. So now we have a flow and we have an indication of it. We can do a quick test and say, okay, what happens if we open up our recirculation valve on the catalyst manifold? And we will, when we open it, we will see the flow indicator. We will then probably get a flow fault on our interrupt here, and then we'll also see our indicator and hear the whistle. This might be quite loud. So you can see what happened is we have flow of catalyst up and through, and now we have flow of catalyst to the alarm. So we have our flow switch is indicating, we also have an indicator and we heard the alarm. So if we close the valve, we stop, all of our lights should go off. This light will remain. Again, this tells us what the issue was, what our problem with the system was, is that we had a flow through our recirculation valve was either left open or open during spray. And now when we start back up again, we have turned off our flow. So now we see again, we've indicated that we have flow, and our alarm went away. So again, it's a very simple way. We can do that one more time. And you can see our alarm, what the problem is. Now the flow is stopped since I turned the valve off. So we no longer know that this is the issue, but we still have this alarm. When we stop and start back up again, within a few seconds, our indicator will be deactivated. Okay, so to simulate the overpressure, what we'll do is we'll disconnect our signal line from the ECA, and we'll just put a little bit of air to the flow of the ECA to indicate that we have an overpressure situation. So if I have flow, as we can see, we have no alarm. If I put a little bit of air to our, again, now we see we have the indicator for the flow. We've lifted up the magnet here, indicating that we have an overpressure situation flowing through our overpressure. We had our alarm, our audible alarm, and now if we stop, we still have the indicator, and then when we start back up again, within a few seconds that alarm goes away. So this, again, gives us a very simple way of knowing where our catalyst issues are. As long as we have flow on our indicator through the bottom left-hand side here, this indicates flow. If we have any troubles, if we leave the recirculation valve open or an overpressure situation, those faults will indicate up here on our interrupt or our fault signals and show us where that fault is, so that we can then go to that situation, whether it be the overpressure or to our recirculation valve and check to make sure everything's working properly. Okay, so if we wanted to then also change our configuration so that we were taking our signal from the gun signal, that's the signal that comes back from the gun actuator and comes back to turn the pump on, we can simply reconfigure. In this case, we will change our configuration to be more straightforward, directly from the gun signal. We'll put this back here. We will then take our signal here, and we're going to tie our supply down here. Let's turn off our main air. And we'll unplug our power. So we don't have any power, we don't have any air, we can make our different connections here. So we're simply going to move a T in here. So we'll take here, this will be our supply coming in. We're going to tee off of this. To come in there. So now we just need a T to run up and supply our signal up here. And for that, we can just cut another piece of green tube. That doesn't matter the color as long as it's poly tube. So now we have our supply comes in, we're supplying the ECA, we're also supplying our signal to the valve that's going to bring our signal. So in this case, we're going to tee off our signal. So we'll have a short piece of poly tube here. That's going to be our signal to the MAC valve, to turn the MAC valve on. We'll have our signal from the gun. That signal then also now has to go over to supply. I'll grab a little bit longer piece of tube, maybe from here. So that's our signal line. So now when we pull the trigger on the gun, we'll get a signal that's going to activate the MAC valve, but we'll also come over and activate the switch here, and then we can simply make this connection from our outlet of the valve to the ECA. We will also then get inside of the box. We will switch the valve, or the switch, the dip switch, from the power head to the gun signal. Then we can also set our cycles per second to the proper setting so that when the power head is moving, we know how fast it's moving, and that will then get our indicator.